Hey guys, tonight we are stepping off a wooden ship into a world that doesn't really want you there. The gangplank creaks under your boots, and every exhale turns instantly into a frosty cloud that clings to your moustache, or, if you're unlucky, freezes right to your beard in stiff white needles. You are entering the Victorian Arctic expedition, one of those journeys that you probably wouldn't survive beyond the first 5 minutes. But don't worry, tonight you don't have to. You only need to wander along with me, at a gentle pace, while we peek into the peculiar bedtime rituals of men who insisted on sleeping in places where the sun might not rise again for months at a time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The planks of the ship are slick with ice as you step down, boots heavy with layers of wool socks. The air bites at your cheeks like a sarcastic cousin, playful, but sharp enough to sting. Around you, the world is blank. Not blank in the peaceful, white sand beach kind of way. Blank in the Arctic sense. Snow piled against snow, a horizon swallowed by fog, sky the color of an unwashed tea towel. The only sound is the crunch of your boots and the faint groan of ice shifting under the ship's hull. The Victorians, bless them, thought they could tame this environment with the same confidence they brought to designing elaborate waistcoats and ridiculous sideburns. And so you, following in their snowy footsteps, step off the ship into a land where the very concept of bedtime becomes a negotiation with nature. Historians still argue whether it was bravery, hubris, or sheer boredom that led so many expeditions here in the first place. Maybe all three. You drag your pack. Behind you, leather stiff as a biscuit that's been left in the oven for 3 days too long. The crew shuffles in a loose line, everyone's breath puffing in rhythm like a locomotive. The captain mutters something about finding a good patch of ice for camp, which is a bit like saying, "Let's find a soft rock to lie on." Good luck with that. The air carries no smell, except maybe salt, and the faint, rancid trace of whale oil clinging to your coat. Your nose hairs freeze together each time you inhale, and for a ridiculous moment you imagine they're knitting a little scarf inside your nostrils. Victorian explorers didn't write that detail in their diaries, but you know they thought it. Already you feel the sleepiness tugging, not from relaxation, but from the sheer exhaustion of just existing in this cold. The body burns calories faster here. Every step feels like you're hauling furniture up a flight of stairs. That's one of those mainstream facts. Arctic explorers in the Victorian era but often required 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day just to keep moving. And no, they didn't have protein bars in their pockets, just hardtack biscuits, salted beef, and whatever unlucky seal wandered into range. The ship behind you fades into the mist, its masts poking out like spindly needles. This is the frostbitten arrival, the ritual every explorer endured before they even thought about unrolling a blanket. You stamp your boots harder, trying to keep the blood moving. Your fingers inside wool mittens feel like 10 frozen sausages. You flex them, pretending it helps. A curious tidbit floats up in memory. Some explorers swore that rubbing snow directly on frostbitten skin helped revive it. Others insisted this was nonsense and only made things worse. Historians still argue whether this was folklore, desperation, or a very poor medical experiment. Tonight, you're not about to try it. You're already busy trying to keep your nose attached to your face. Ahead, the captain halts. He points toward a patch of ice, where snow has drifted in oddly smooth piles, like giant marshmallows left out in the cold. "Camp here," he mutters, and the men groan. You join them, because that's the rule. When the leader speaks, the rest of you pretend it's a brilliant idea. The work begins. Tents must be set, dogs must be tethered, supplies unloaded. You trudge across the snow, your breath rasping. The packs feel heavier than your entire body weight. Someone curses under their breath about the cold. Another hums a hymn, out of habit, or maybe to keep his teeth from chattering. You wonder, idly, whether anyone ever tried lullabies here. It seems absurd. Singing "Rock-a-bye, baby" while your eyelashes are freezing solid. But hey, stranger things have happened. Remember those Romans who used crocodile dung as sunscreen? Compared to that, a lullaby in the Arctic seems perfectly reasonable. Everywhere you look, the world is frozen. The water lapping against the ice edge sounds like glass being stirred in. A tumbler. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, its echo bouncing off invisible walls. And when you pause for just a moment, you realize this place is too quiet. It's the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat, like a drumbeat under layers of wool. And yet the Victorians brought their rituals with them. You imagine them writing in journals. Tonight we landed. The ice stretched in all directions. The men were cold yet cheerful. Cheerful is one word for it. You, personally, are less cheerful and more desperately craving a warm pillow. But the pillow won't come yet. First comes the ritual of arrival, finding footing, staking a claim on the ice, pretending that this camp will feel like home. You stamp the ground, marking a spot where maybe, just maybe, you'll later crawl into some semblance of a bed. And so, the frostbitten arrival becomes not just a physical act, but a mental one. Every night will repeat this rhythm. Step off, shuffle forward, stake your place. You're already imagining the next steps, lamps, clothing, strange bedtime drinks. But for now, the ritual is simple. Breathe, stamp, endure. The wind picks up, tugging at your scarf, and you think, a little sarcastically, perfect sleeping weather. The canvas resists you like a stubborn cat, stiff with frost, refusing to fold or bend the way you want. You tug harder, your mittens catching on a seam, and for a moment you feel like you're fighting with a frozen bedsheet that's being dunked in soup and left outside overnight. Welcome to the peculiar pleasure of Victorian Arctic camp setup. You thought you were going to tuck into bed soon. Not yet. First, you have to build the bedroom itself. The ground beneath your boots crunches with that hollow, squeaky sound snow makes when it's too cold to even think about melting. You stamp it flat, making a surface for the tent poles, though flat is optimistic. It's more like you've punched dents in a frozen cake. The poles clatter in your hands, wood so dry and brittle it feels like it might splinter into kindling just from looking at it wrong. And then comes the ropes. Oh, the ropes. They're stiff as steel cables, frozen into shapes that look like abstract art. You tug them straight, fingers fumbling inside mittens, and it feels like trying to untie spaghetti that's been cooked, frozen, and glued together again. You think briefly about scissors, how easy it would be to just cut everything and start over, but Victorian expeditions didn't exactly carry spares. So you kneel, knees sinking into snow that numbs instantly, and wrestle the knots. Someone next to you sneezes explosively, and a second later mutters that he's perfectly fine. Everyone is perfectly fine out here, even when their noses look like raw beets. The canvas finally takes shape. It's more of a flapping sail than a cozy home, but you squint at it, tilt your head, and convince yourself it'll do. Historians still argue whether explorers truly believed their tents offered real protection, or whether it was all psychological. After all, when a gale can rip through at 40 miles per hour, your little rectangle of cloth is basically optimism held up by string. There's a kind of meditative rhythm to it that, driving stakes into the snow, pulling lines taut, stepping back to admire the sagging result. You almost trick yourself into thinking it's a normal camping trip, the kind where marshmallows and ghost stories come next. Except, of course, the only marshmallows here are the massive, frozen snowdrifts. And the ghosts are real enough, in the form of half-remembered sailors who never came back. You glance at your hands, red and clumsy. Fun fact, Victorian explorers used to rub lamp black, or soot, into tiny cuts on their fingers, believing it prevented frostbite. Was it true? Historians still argue. You're just grateful your mittens hide the shaking. Around you, the camp grows slowly. Dogs are tethered, barking hoarsely. Crates of salted beef and barrels of biscuits are stacked in what everyone insists is an orderly way, though it looks suspiciously like a haphazard pile. A fellow explorer curses as his stake pulls free, the tent collapsing on his head like a sulky curtain. You laugh. So, finally, not out of cruelty, but because humour is one of the few warm things left. He mutters that it's all part of the routine, which is exactly what someone would say when trying not to cry. The captain strolls by, nodding approvingly at the progress. He claims this is textbook procedure. You suspect the textbook he's referring to was written by someone who never left their fireplace in London. Still, there's comfort in the repetition. The canvas rises, the ropes stretch, the camp takes form. You realize that bedtime isn't just about lying down. It's about creating the illusion of safety, fabric walls against an endless horizon, rope lines against the unknown. As the last stake is driven, you stand back, panting clouds into the air. Your tent wobbles in the wind, a humble fortress against the Arctic night. You know it won't keep the cold out, but it will keep the snow off your face, and sometimes that's enough. With a wry smile you think, congratulations, you've just made your bed. Now try not to freeze in it. The light is fading, though to be fair in the Arctic, fading is a relative term. It's less sunset and more a slow dimming, like someone twisting the brightness knob on an old television. You duck inside the tent you helped wrestle into submission, and for the first time since stepping off the ship, you can almost pretend there's such a thing as indoors. But indoors is useless without light, so you fumble for the one thing every Victorian Arctic explorer depended on at night: the whale oil lamp. The lamp looks innocent enough, just a squat metal body with a little wick, a lid that refuses to open without a struggle, and the faint smell of the sea clinging to it. You tug at the cap with fingers that are halfway numb, muttering something un-Victorian under your breath. Finally it loosens with a squeak, and you dip the wick, careful not to spill too much of the precious oil. Each drop is worth its weight in warmth and sanity. When the flame sputters to life, the whole tent changes. Shadows stretch across the canvas walls, orange glow trembling like a heartbeat. It's dim and it's greasy, but it's better than staring into the black void outside. The smell, however, that's a different story. Whale oil has what you might charitably call a distinctive aroma, somewhere between rancid butter and a fish market after closing. You wrinkle your nose, but then remind yourself you're not here for a spa treatment. You're here to not die of darkness. One of the crew nearby chuckles, waving his hand dramatically. "Better than candles, eh?" he says. You nod, though you're not entirely convinced. Candles would at least smell like beeswax. But candles melt too fast, and whale oil, cheap, transportable, and available in bulk, is what the Victorians trusted to light the Arctic. Historians still argue whether this was practical genius or an olfactory curse that slowly eroded morale. Probably both. As you settle beside the flickering lamp, you notice how hypnotic it becomes. The shadows waver, stretching into long, distorted shapes. One looks suspiciously like a polar bear, another like a bishop wagging his finger. You blink and they shift again. You could almost believe the lamp is playing tricks, creating a bedtime puppet show just for you. There's a quirky fact tucked in here. Some explorers swore the whale oil lamps attracted spirits, or at least gave them a place to sit. Diaries describe shadows moving when no one stirred, lamps guttering when the tent was still. Was it the wind? Was it exhaustion? Historians still argue, but as you watch the flame dance, you think you'd believe anything in this strange twilight. The warmth is meager, but it's there. You cup your hands close and the heat barely grazes your fingertips. You sigh contentedly, knowing it's a placebo more than anything else. The rest of your body is still encased in wool, flannel, and stiff leather, but your eyes trick your brain into believing you're cozy. Like a cat, sitting beside a radiator, you soak it in. The lamp also sets the rhythm of camp. One by one, tents light up across the ice, small halos in a vast ocean of black. From the outside, it must look like a handful of stars scattered across the ground. From the inside, it feels like belonging. You're part of something, however ridiculous, a group of people choosing to sleep under whale oil's sleepy glow at the edge of the world. And just when you're drifting into that trance, the lamp sputters, threatening to die. Your heart leaps. You're already imagining the crushing black. Quickly you adjust the wick, coaxing the flame back to life. It flares, smokes a little, then steadies again. A small victory, but in the Arctic, victories are measured in flickers of light. The smell lingers, heavy and fishy. Someone jokes that when they return home, Londoners will know them by scent alone. Ah, yes, you must be the man who reeks of whales. Everyone chuckles, though half-heartedly. The laughter echoes off the canvas walls and mingles with the lamp's hiss, a lullaby of sorts. You lean back, eyelids heavy. The glow softens the harsh edges of the tent, blurring everything into warmth. Outside, the world groans, ice shifting, dogs yipping. But in here, in this small circle of orange, the night feels manageable. The lamp becomes your nightlight, your anchor, your peculiar companion in a place that has no bedtime but demands one anyway. And as you stare into the flame, your last thought before dozing is this. It may smell like rancid fish stew, but it's the coziest rancid fish stew you've ever known. The lamp flickers on the canvas walls, casting just enough glow for you to peel off the day's layers, or rather, to pile on more of them. In the Victorian Arctic, bedtime clothes don't mean silk nightshirts or lace-trimmed caps. No, you are about to discover the peculiar ritual of layered nightwear, the human equivalent of stuffing laundry into a suitcase until it won't close. You begin with flannel undershirts, flannel drawers, flannel socks. They cling to your skin, scratchy but dependable, holding the faint warmth of your body as if it were an endangered species. Over the flannel comes wool, thick, itchy, stubborn wool that feels like you've wrapped yourself in a carpet that once lived on a sheep. Historians still argue whether wool really kept men warm when damp, or whether it simply made them too tired to complain. Either way, the Victorians swore by it. Then come the furs. Caribou, bear, fox, whatever unfortunate creature crossed paths with the expedition earlier in the season. You pull a hood up over your head and suddenly feel like a taxidermy exhibit in a natural history museum, except this exhibit snores. One explorer's diary even mentions sleeping in an entire reindeer skin, hooves and all, like a bizarre wearable sleeping bag. You wonder if the reindeer got the last laugh, haunting his dreams in antlered glory. A crewman next to you grumbles as he tries to pull his boots back on. Yes, back on. In the Victorian Arctic, you sometimes slept in your boots, not because you wanted to, but because taking them off meant finding your toes frozen stiff by morning. Imagine tucking into bed wearing size 10 leather buckets. Comfortable? Absolutely not. Necessary? Almost always. You adjust your mittens, debating whether to wear them to sleep. The consensus was split. Some explorers claimed mittens in bed kept frostbite at bay, while others muttered that sweating hands made things worse. Historians still argue, naturally. You decide on a compromise, one mitten on, one mitten off, feeling like a very indecisive Victorian Goldilocks. The layers pile higher. By the time you finish, you're more bundle than person. Rolling over feels like steering a wheelbarrow through molasses. Your body heat is trapped somewhere in the folds, trying to find its way back to you. You wiggle your toes and hear the faint squeak of wool against wool, a sound you know will haunt your dreams. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some explorers reportedly stuffed their clothes with dried moss for extra insulation. Yes, moss. Imagine sleeping in nature's sponge, hoping it keeps you warmer than the frozen air outside. One man swore by it. Another wrote that moss only made him itch in places I dare not describe. You can sympathize. You pause, listening to the symphony around you, snuffling, groaning, the occasional rip of fabric as someone adjusts a waistband that's gone too tight. It's bedtime music, Victorian Arctic style. And in this moment, you realize that bedtime was never about comfort. It was about defiance. You wore every layer because every layer said, "I will not freeze tonight." As you shift under the furs, you chuckle softly to yourself. If someone from the future could see you now, they'd mistake you for an overstuffed scarecrow tipped over in the snow. Or maybe a burrito, an extremely grumpy, wool-flavored burrito. You whisper to yourself, "Good night, Burr." Itto me, and let the layers press down like a weighted blanket from another century. Outside, the wind sighs, brushing against the tent. Inside, you sweat just enough under the pile to know the ritual worked. Peculiar? Yes. Effective? Usually. And somehow, wrapped like this, you drift into that half-sleep where warmth and ridiculousness blend together, and even the Arctic feels like it might allow dreams. Your body is bundled into enough layers to resemble a human-shaped trunk. But sleep doesn't come yet. Not without the nightly ritual of bedtime drinks. The Arctic may be frozen, but Victorians loved a warm sip before drifting off, and you're about to share in the peculiar menu. Tepid cocoa, lukewarm grog, and the occasional experimental concoction that probably belonged in a chemist's lab. A crewmate ladles cocoa into a dented tin mug and passes it to you. You cradle it in both hands, hoping the heat will seep into your bones. The cocoa is thin, barely darker than muddy water, sweet.
Ned with a miserly sprinkle of sugar, but it tastes like heaven after hours of cold air. Historians still argue whether the psychological comfort of cocoa outweighed its lack of nutritional punch, but no one questioned it. Even a watery cup carried the flavour of home, of London shops and fire-warmed parlours. Next comes the grog, rum mixed with water, sometimes spiced, sometimes just bitter. The Victorians insisted it was fortifying, though you suspect it was more about dulling the edges of frostbite than adding fortitude. You sip, the burn chasing the chill down your throat. Someone beside you smacks their lips and declares, "Warms the soul, lads," though you're fairly certain it only warmed his nose. One quirky detail makes you pause. Nutmeg. Yes, nutmeg. Some explorers swore by sprinkling a little into their cocoa or grog as a bedtime aid. Others argued it brought nightmares or indigestion. Historians still argue over whether nutmeg was considered a sedative or a stimulant. Tonight, you're not convinced either way. It mostly tastes like someone dropped a Christmas pudding into your drink and fished it out again. Around you, the tent fills with soft slurping and sighs. A man cracks a joke that grog is just courage in liquid form, but only half strength. Another mutters that if the Admiralty had really cared about them, they would have sent brandy instead. The lamp flickers as laughter rises warm in its own way. As you sip, you notice how the drinks aren't just about comfort. They're a ritual of control. In a land where everything is unpredictable, the weather, the ice, even your own body, you can at least decide what passes your lips before sleep. You can sip cocoa and imagine hearths, or swallow grog and imagine you're bold. It's theatre, and the stage is your mouth. You lean back, mug empty, and listen to the aftermath. Snores already ripple through the tent, rhythmic and absurd, like a chorus of walruses auditioning for an opera. Someone hiccups in their sleep, pee. Another mumbles about apples, clear evidence that grog has already nudged him into dreams. And you, half amused, half drowsy, feel the warmth of your drink settle in. The Arctic still howls outside, wind tugging at the canvas, but inside your belly glows. Peculiar bedtime drinks may not guarantee rest, but they grant the illusion of choice, a gentle curtain to close over another frozen day. You set your tin aside, lick the last trace of cocoa from your lips, and whisper, "Cheers, nutmeg," before sinking deeper into the night. The last traces of cocoa sweetness linger on your tongue as you lie back, ready, or at least pretending, to sleep. But one obstacle remains. Where do you put your head? A pillow, after all, is not something the Victorians thought worth dragging across oceans of ice. Too bulky, too frivolous. So you, like them, must make do with peculiar pillow choices, each more ridiculous than the last. You start with the obvious, a rolled-up coat, thick wool, stiff with frost, lumpy in all the wrong places. You bunch it beneath your head, shift once, twice, 3 times, then give up. The collar jabs you in the ear, the buttons press into your temple, and the faint smell of whale oil clings to the fabric. Comfortable? Not quite. Option 2. Boots. Yes, boots. One explorer's journal even mentions sleeping with his head propped on his own frozen footwear. The logic is simple. If you're going to suffer, you may as well multitask. Rest your neck while keeping your boots from freezing solid. You try it. Ging. Slowly placing your head on the pair you haven't dared remove. The leather creaks.
The soles feel like bricks, and after 30 seconds your skull protests. You mutter a sarcastic 5-star hotel service under your breath. Option 3. Food sacks. A barrel of biscuits, a bag of flour, or, most memorably, a sack of ship's bread. You try leaning into the curve of a bag marked hardtack. The biscuits inside are as forgiving as gravel, and one sharp corner digs into your cheek. You imagine explaining to a London doctor that your face bruise came from sleeping on a biscuit. Historians still argue whether these makeshift pillows were practical, or just proof of how low the bar for comfort could fall. But the strangest option of all appears when a crewmate casually tucks his head onto a rolled-up map case. Yes, the painstaking charts of Arctic coasts, meant to guide ships and inspire admiralty back home, now double as a pillow. You watch him snore, cheek pressed against penciled coastlines, and think, perhaps the only way to dream of new worlds is literally to sleep on them. There's a quirky tidbit tucked in here too. Some explorers brought along decorative cushions from home, gifts from mothers or sweethearts, embroidered with flowers or initials. These quickly became communal treasures, passed around the tent until the stitching frayed. Imagine 6 frostbitten men fighting politely over a pink cushion embroidered with daisies. One diary mentions such a pillow being used as an object of rotation, as if it were a shared relic. You, however, make do with your coat again. You punch it into shape, ignore the buttons, and resign yourself to imperfection. That's the lesson here. Comfort is relative. If your head is higher than the icy ground, you're winning. Outside, the ice groans like an old staircase. Inside, men shuffle on their sacks and boots, murmuring in half-sleep. You adjust one more time, sigh dramatically, and whisper, "Good night, biscuit pillow," before Letty. Your head sink into the least uncomfortable position. And strangely, it works. Not because the pillow is good, but because the ritual convinces you it is. Tonight, the biscuit sack or the boot or the coat is not an object. It's a symbol, a reminder that sleep will come, even here, on the hardest surfaces of Earth. You've finally resigned yourself to the indignities of your so-called pillow, and perhaps even drifted for a precious handful of minutes. But the tent breathes around you. Every exhalation of the men beside you fogs the air. Every shift of weight on the floor creaks against the silence. And there's still the matter of what to wear while trying to sleep. In Victorian London, you'd slip into a nightshirt, maybe tuck under a quilt. Here in the Arctic? Forget it. You wear whatever hasn't frozen solid. You lie there wrapped in layers of wool that smell like damp sheep. The collars itch. The cuffs are crusted stiff. And your mittens, yes, mittens in bed, trap the smell of seal oil. You wiggle your fingers, trying to decide if it's worse to freeze them off or stew them in their own sweat. Some men keep their gloves on all night. Others risk taking them off, then wake up with hands so numb they can't light the morning stove. You, of course, argue with yourself in circles and end up half wearing one mitten just to hedge bets. Boots are another nightly debate. Do you keep them on so you can stumble outside quickly if the ice shifts or a polar bear pokes its head in? Or do you take them off, risk waking to find them frozen into blocks? One quirky diary entry describes a sailor who solved this by sleeping with his boots tucked inside his shirt, like a pair of cold, smelly children. You imagine yourself hugging your own boots to your chest like a bedtime teddy bear, and stifle a laugh. Then there are the hats. Nobody takes a hat off, not even when burrowing into blankets. Bald men tie scarves around their heads like makeshift turbans, while those with beards wake to fin, and their whiskers fused into icy stalactites. You stroke your own chin and half-joke that at least the frost makes a free-styling gel. Mainstream history tells us that explorers layered flannel, wool and sealskin, piling one on top of another until movement was almost impossible. But the fringe tidbit, the one that makes you raise an eyebrow, is the rumor that some men actually slept naked inside fur sleeping bags, believing skin-to-fur contact trapped heat better than clothes. Historians still argue whether this was practical science or wishful thinking by men who simply couldn't bear another night in scratchy flannel. You picture yourself stripping down and sliding into a reeking bearskin sack, then quickly veto the idea. As you shuffle deeper into your layers, you're struck by how little separates you from absurdity. Victorian society prided itself on strict dress codes, hats indoors, gloves at dinner, waistcoats at all times. Yet here, at the ends of the earth, fashion boils down to.
Whether you're willing to wear your boots as a necklace while hugging a frozen biscuit sack.
You mutter, "Take that, London tailors," under your breath. A crewmate beside you suddenly sneezes, the sound echoing like a cannon blast in the tiny tent. He grumbles, adjusts his hat, and tugs his scarf tighter. You chuckle softly. It seems no matter the century, bedclothes are never quite comfortable. You close your eyes, tug your blanket a little higher, and let the scratch of wool and the reek of oil remind you that, somehow, you are dressed for bed. The tent has quieted again, but now your mind drifts to what's rattling inside your stomach. Dinner, such as it was, has long since congealed into a memory of grease and brine. You shift, feeling the familiar heaviness of salt pork settling like a brick. Out here, bedtime isn't only about finding warmth. It's about surviving on rations so peculiar they make you question what counts as food. You fumble in your memory. The daily menu is ably simple. Salted beef, salt pork, hardtack. Repeat until you lose track of the days. Hardtack, of course, is that infamous cracker, a square so dense it could double as a weapon. You've gnawed one corner, hoping your teeth will forgive you. Sometimes the biscuits are crawling with weevils. And yes, you notice. But you're too tired to care, and the men joke that the bugs add extra protein. You crunch down, muttering that you've just invented the Victorian energy bar. A mainstream historical fact. Polar expeditions were supplied with barrels of pemmican, a mixture of dried meat and fat, originally perfected by indigenous peoples. It was nutrient-dense, long-lasting, and when not spoiled, life-saving. Yet, according to journals, sailors complained about the monotony. One man called it a candle masquerading as food. You can almost taste it. Waxy, greasy, but undeniably filling. The fringe tidbit comes from whispered reports that desperate crews sometimes experimented with Arctic tea, a brew made from melted snow and scraps of shoe leather boiled into broth. Was it really consumed, or just one of those half-truths sailors told to horrify landlubbers? Historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerations. You tilt your head, picturing yourself sipping a mug of boot soup, and decide you'd rather chew frozen hardtack until your molars crumble. Bedtime rituals, naturally, bend around the stomach. Some men save a sliver of chocolate for the late hours, nibbling it like contraband. Others hoard raisins or dried apples. Imagine unwrapping one shriveled piece of fruit in the dim tent, chewing slowly and pretending it's a feast. For a fleeting moment you might even forget the taste of brine. But there's also the midnight dread. Scurvy. You think about swollen gums, loose teeth, the slow unraveling of health when fresh citrus is nowhere in sight. The Admiralty famously stocked lime juice to fight the disease, but in the Arctic, barrels often froze or spoiled. You lie there, tongue probing your teeth nervously, half convinced you feel a wobble, and then you laugh at yourself, because the only thing loose is your imagination. The tent air carries faint smells of grease, sweat, and biscuit dust. You find yourself wondering how many centuries of explorers have fallen asleep to the same perfume. You shift again, tucking a crumb of hardtack back into your pocket for tomorrow. There's a strange comfort in routine. It may be terrible, but at least it's reliably terrible. A crewmate rolls over, muttering in his sleep about roast beef and puddings. You grin, because dreams are the only place where Victorian explorers get a proper supper. You close your eyes, let your own mind wander toward imaginary feasts, and remind yourself, tonight's bedtime ritual isn't just blankets and boots, it's the quiet, stubborn courage of lying down hungry, again, and somehow finding rest. The tent grows quieter as everyone settles, but sleep is rarely immediate in the air. Richtig. You lie there, listening to the whispers of superstition that travel like a breeze through the frozen canvas. Victorian explorers, as rational as they tried to be in daylight, were prone to nightly rituals rooted in folklore, some practical, others absurd. Tonight, you join them, half believing, half amused, in a ritual older than the empire that sent you here. You fumble in your pocket for the tiny crust of bread you've saved, and with deliberate care, you toss it outside the tent flap. The superstition is simple. Crumbs left for the frost spirits or ice goblins who wander the camp at night will appease them. Ignore it at your peril, the sailors say. You shake your head, amused. Bread for spirits? It's oddly comforting, in a laughable sort of way. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were genuinely feared or merely morale-boosting games to pass the endless nights. The crew murmurs quietly to each other as they perform their own minor rituals. A man sprinkles salt at the corners of his bedding, claiming it wards off bad dreams. Another mutters an incantation learned from a Scottish cousin who knew such things, which mostly consists of repeated words that sound like hiccups. You smile, imagining these rituals as the Victorian Arctic's equivalent of bedtime prayers. A quirky detail emerges. Some explorers carried small charms, little carved wooden figures, bits of jewelry, even thimbles, to place under their pillows. One sailor swore that keeping a thimble beneath your head prevented frostbite in your ears. Another insisted that a carved bear warded off polar bears. You roll your eyes at first, then consider that if a tiny charm gives you the courage to sleep, who's really being foolish? The night hums with these low-level rituals, punctuated by distant groans of ice and the occasional bark of a dog. You lie still, savouring the warmth trapped in your layered nightwear, and participate silently. You rub your hands over the folds of your coat, pairing your own protective nonsense. A brush of snow against the canvas makes you startle, then relax again. In the Arctic, imagination is a survival tool, and superstition is just a way of keeping the mind engaged when the world outside is endless white. Even the bread, now crusty and frozen, carries a symbolic weight. Tossing it is a small assertion of control, an act that says, I know the ice is vast, but I can influence this tiny patch of the world. Comfort, after all, comes from illusion as much as reality. You hear the soft laughter of a man already half asleep, dreaming of the absurd, and you feel yourself drifting closer to your own dreams. The rituals, no matter how peculiar, are anchors, gentle tethers that keep your mind from floating into panic. Breadcrumbs, salt, charms, and whispered incantations, they're all part of the nightly Arctic symphony, a lullaby woven from superstition, habit, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow will come. The Arctic night settles like a heavy quilt over the camp, but it is far from silent. Outside, the ice groans, cracks, and shifts as though sighing under the weight of the frozen world. Dogs yip and whine at shadows invisible to your eyes, and somewhere, a distant gull, or perhaps your imagination, screeches across the horizon. Inside your tent you lie still, attuned to every tiny sound. This is the ritual of midnight listening, an odd symphony that Victorian explorers embraced, and in some strange way cherished. You shift slightly under your layered clothing, trying to ignore the occasional flap of canvas that slaps against a stake with a sharp, hollow noise. Sleep demands attention, but the Arctic seems determined to intrude. Each pop of ice against ice, each whistle of wind through the tent lines, forms a rhythm that you begin to follow unconsciously. Historians still argue whether this heightened sensory awareness was beneficial or merely a form of prolonged stress that kept explorers alert in their dreams. A quirky tidbit: some diaries mention explorers placing small sticks near their ears at night to detect the first subtle cracks of approaching ice. A snap or groan would alert them to potential hazards or shifts in the frozen camp. You roll your eyes slightly at the absurdity, imagining a tent full of men holding toothpicks like periscopes, but then you realize it was oddly clever. Awareness could be life-saving in the Arctic, even during sleep. The soundscape is not just ice and wind, it's also the orchestra of the camp itself. You hear the shuffle of a man adjusting his layers, a stifled cough from another, the rhythmic breathing of your companions as they curl into furs and blankets. Occasionally someone snores, a deep, vibrating note that resonates against the canvas walls. One sailor's snore even rises and falls like a baritone wave, filling the small space with a sense of communal security. You, of course, lie there imagining yourself as part of the ski symphony.
Your heartbeat aligns with the flapping canvas. Your breath matches the size of ice. The Arctic night, so menacing in theory, becomes strangely musical. You almost giggle, thinking that this is the most absurd lullaby you've ever experienced. Ice, dogs, snores, and the occasional creak of leather boots. Mainstream history notes that explorers often slept in these noisy conditions out of necessity rather than choice, enduring the clamor as best they could. Yet, the fringe detail is just as important. Some men reported that listening closely to the nocturnal sounds helped them dream more vividly, sometimes leading to half-sleep visions of home, family, or, hilariously, imagined feasts and dances in London drawing rooms. You tuck your head deeper into your makeshift pillow, adjusting the biscuit sack for comfort, and let the night sounds weave around you. Each crack, each whisper, each distant howl becomes a companion, not a threat. The Arctic, in its midnight cacophony, transfigured, forms into a strange guardian, keeping you company as you float between wakefulness and slumber. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the occasional howl or flapping canvas. The ritual is complete. You are attentive, aware, but slowly surrendering to the gentle cadence of the frozen world. And for the first time tonight, the idea of sleep seems less impossible and more like a promise, waiting just beyond the faint orange glow of your whale oil lamp. By now your eyes are heavy, but sleep in the Victorian Arctic comes in stages, each peculiar in its own right. First comes the dozing phase, a light, almost hovering state where you're aware of every creak, shuffle, and whisper around you. You lie wrapped in layers, listening to the soft rustle of furs and canvas, feeling the faint vibrations of men shifting beside you. The mind tries to convince you it's warm, though your fingers still feel like tiny ice blocks. In this delicate stage, explorers practiced a quiet ritual, adjusting their sets, sleeping positions with minimal disturbance. One might roll onto a side, tuck a knee under the chest, or shift a boot slightly, all moves calculated to preserve warmth while conserving energy. You follow suit, gingerly repositioning yourself so your coat doesn't fold in ways that press painfully against your ribs. Historians still argue whether these movements were deliberate survival tactics or simply unconscious responses to cold discomfort. A quirky detail emerges as you focus on your breathing. Some men would whisper a single mantra under their breath, not out of superstition, but to steady the mind. Phrases like warmth, or home, or even hardtack forever were repeated, quietly, over and over. You smirk at the absurdity but join in silently, muttering, "Sleep, Arctic sleep," like a secret pact with the frost. The low hum of nocturnal rituals continues around you. Someone reaches for a small charm beneath their pillow, lightly touching it for reassurance. Another gently taps a stick against the floor, listening for subtle shifts in ice. The combination of whispering, tapping, and breathing creates a rhythm almost musical in nature, a lullaby unique to the frozen frontier. You realize you're participating without knowing it, your own small rituals, wiggling toes, adjusting your biscuit sack pillow, blending seamlessly with the camp's nightly choreography. Outside, the wind carries distant groans from broken ice sheets, a reminder that the Arctic remains unconquered, even in sleep. Yet inside, the tent is a bubble of shared absurdity and stubborn warmth. One explorer snores, and you wonder if he dreams of London streets, roaring fireplaces, or perhaps dancing in a hall of frost-covered chandeliers. The imagination is alive, even in half-sleep. Historians also note that some explorers practice breathing exercises to stave off hypothermia during sleep. You try mimicking them, slow inhales and exhales, counting to 5 with each. The technique is more amusing than effective, but it does something odd. Your mind begins to slow. Your body feels the weight of the layers, and the Arctic night outside seems just slightly less menacing. And then comes the final, almost imperceptible ritual: surrender.
You tuck your chin into your coat, curl fingers under your chin, and allow yourself to drift, trusting in the lamp, the blankets, the sounds, and the strange, comforting absurdity of your fellow men. The tent breathes, the ice groans, and you become part of the Arctic night's rhythm, finally sliding into that vulnerable, perfect stage of sleep. Sleep, when it finally comes, is restless at first. You twitch under the weight of layers, muffled mittens tugging at your wrists, the boot pillow shifting beneath your head. Dreams arrive slowly, wrapped in the scent of whale oil, salt pork and biscuit dust. You drift in and out, half conscious of the world outside the tent, half lost in imagined London parlours where curtains don't flap and ice doesn't groan. Is a mainstream historical fact tucked in here. Explorers often awoke during the night to perform inspection rounds, checking tents, stoves and dogs. The Arctic did not wait for you to finish your nap. Even in sleep, you must remain vigilant. You feel the tug of duty in your subconscious, imagining yourself rolling over to peer outside, listening for any movement in the ice that might indicate a crack or a shifting snowdrift. The fringe tidbit is equally strange. Some men believed that sleeping with a small piece of coal in their mittens or under their pillow would attract warmth into their dreams. You shake your head, amused, but mentally tuck a pretend lump of coal into your hand. Historians still argue whether such rituals were protective superstitions or merely psychological crutches to cope with the endless cold. Either way, tonight you allow yourself a tiny, comforting bit of nonsense. Occasionally, someone snores, and the sound echoes off the canvas like a small drumbeat. You find yourself integrating it into your dreamscape, imagining a parade of snoring men marching across a frozen London street, boots crunching, coats flapping. The absurdity blends seamlessly with reality, a gentle, humorous thread weaving through the Arctic night. A quirky detail surfaces as your mind wanders. In some journals, explorers describe using wool scraps to create tiny pillow forts inside their sleeping bags, giving their heads a miniature fortress against drafts. You picture a fort large enough to hold a thimble, a scrap of biscuit, and a tiny wooden charm, and can't help but grin in your sleep. Outside, the wind intensifies, flapping the canvas with gusts that rattle stakes. Yet inside, cocooned in wool, furs and imagination, the storm feels distant. Every creak and whisper becomes part of a nocturnal lullaby, a reminder that life persists, even at the edge of the world. Historians note that explorers' sleep was often punctuated by moments of semi-consciousness, away, enough to react if necessary, yet deep enough to restore some energy. You recognize it now, the peculiar blend of vigilance and surrender, absurd rituals and real danger, is what defines Arctic sleep. You drift further, one breath at a time, letting the strange harmony of fear, comfort, and humor carry you. By now the night feels softer. You are cocooned, supported by layers, lulled by ritual and imagination. And slowly, the Arctic seems less like a relentless adversary, and more like a peculiar, if demanding, bedtime companion. Hours pass, though time is a slippery concept when you're wrapped in furs under a tent in the Arctic night. You shift occasionally, sensing the cold creeping through your layers despite your best efforts. The ritual now is subtle, adjusting just enough to preserve warmth without disturbing the delicate balance of clothing, blankets and improvised pillows. Every movement is calculated, though you half sleep, letting instinct take over. A mainstream fact. Example: explorers often layered themselves so thoroughly that they resembled moving mummies. This was not merely aesthetic, it was functional. Each layer trapped a small pocket of air, insulating against the merciless cold. You wiggle a finger to check its circulation, marveling at how ingenuity and necessity intersect in these absurdly detailed routines. The fringe element of this section is particularly peculiar. Some men tucked small notebooks into their pockets at night, scribbling observations or thoughts during wakeful moments. They claimed it helped calm the mind or perhaps warded off nightmares. Historians still debate whether these nocturnal writings were genuinely practical or just another form of eccentricity among isolated men. You imagine yourself reaching for a notebook, scratching the words boots, biscuit, and frost before surrendering again to sleep. Outside, the wind rises and falls rhythmically, a natural metronome for the night. You notice how the tent flexes with each gust, fabric flapping in a manner that feels oddly like applause. In the background, snoring rises and falls in harmony, punctuated occasionally by whispered mutterings about frozen toes or imagined fireplaces. You feel strangely comforted, part of a small, absurd symphony playing only for those who endure the Arctic's peculiar rhythms. One quirky tidbit emerges from journals. Some explorers tied a small bell to their sleeping bag, reasoning that if they began to drift toward hypothermia in their slumber, the bell's motion would alert companions. You imagine a half-asleep man jingling along the ice, muttering sleepily, and suppress a giggle, appreciating the ingenuity and slight madness of it. The mind drifts easily now, weaving between dream and wakefulness. You visualize the lamps glowing softly, the boots arranged in absurd piles, the biscuit sacks acting as mini fortresses. Even the smell of whale oil and sweat transforms into a comforting aroma, a peculiar olfactory signature of safety. And slowly, without conscious effort, you embrace the ultimate ritual: surrender to the Arctic night. Not submission in fear, but a quiet trust in layers, lamplight, companions and tiny charms. The rhythm of wind, ice and breathing carries you further into sleep, a gentle tide that blends humor, absurdity, and survival instinct. Here, in this extreme and peculiar world, you find the peace that the day denied, an uneasy but oddly satisfying sense of rest. Somewhere between half-sleep and full consciousness, you begin to notice the small details that define the Victorian Arctic bedtime. The tent walls stretch and shiver with each gust outside, the canvas whispering secrets of ice shifting in the dark. You listen and imagine the Arctic itself breathing, a slow, deliberate rhythm that mirrors your own. Sleep and wakefulness blur into one continuous experience. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your half-dreams. Explorers often slept in shifts, not always out of military discipline, but because the cold demanded alertness. Even when layered to the brim, the ice could crack unexpectedly, sending sharp, sudden noises through the camp. You lie still, trusting the men beside you, aware that survival depended not just on warmth, but vigilance, even in slumber. The fringe aspect is almost poetic. Some explorers believed that humming softly while drifting off could confuse the Arctic spirits and invite warmer dreams. You imagine a half-dozen frostbitten men, lips moving in silent, sleepy songs, each unaware of the other. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine superstition or just a coping mechanism for isolation. You hum quietly under your breath, testing the theory with a soft that blends with the sighing wind. Your biscuit pillow shifts slightly beneath your head, a reminder of the night's absurdities. Somewhere near you, a crewmate adjusts his coat like a tiny fortress around his body, a layer of defense against the cold that feels almost sack. Red, you tuck your arms under your furs, finding comfort in the shared human struggle. The ritualistic elements of bedtime, layers, snacks, charms, hums, coalesce into a strange symphony, peculiar yet oddly soothing. Quirky details emerge as your imagination stretches. One diary entry notes that an explorer kept a small piece of mirror beneath his pillow to watch for spirits if he awoke in the night. You picture a bleary-eyed man inspecting his own reflection under dim lamplight, seeing not a ghost but the absurdity of his predicament. The Arctic, in its frozen enormity, transforms the mundane into the extraordinary, the ordinary into ritual. The wind outside softens, though ice still groans faintly. You sense that the camp has settled into a collective rhythm, a slow, measured breathing of humans and ice. Your eyelids flutter as a comforting heaviness takes over. You are wrapped in layers, scents, sounds, and rituals, cocooned against the vast, indifferent cold. Each breath draws warmth from the absurdity around you, a gentle reminder that even in extremity, humans create habits that make the impossible manageable. And then, almost imperceptibly, you let go completely. Your body, furs, and mattress of coats surrender to sleep. In the half-dark, amid the creaks, flaps, and snores, you become part of the Arctic night itself, warm, safe, and oddly amused by the rituals that brought you here. The night drifts deeper. You float between dreams and the thin veil of wakefulness, wrapped in the many absurd layers of your Victorian Arctic bedtime ritual. Each breath carries warmth. Each twitch of fabric reminds you of the ingenuity that has kept you alive so far. The wind still murmurs against the tent, ice groaning softly like a distant lullaby. But inside, you are cocooned, part of a small, human symphony against the frozen world. You remember the cocoa, the grog, the biscuit pillows, and the charms tucked under furs. Each element has become an intimate part of your nightly routine, absurd in another context, but essential here. You find humor in the boots pressed against your side, the mittens half on, half off, and the half-frozen biscuit crusts that line your pockets. The rituals themselves have become soothing, turning necessity into a gentle bedtime performance. Historians still argue whether the obsessive layering and peculiar habits were purely practical or also a psychological lifeline. And tonight, you feel that they were both. A quirky detail: one explorer once reported counting layers, boots, furs, and hats before sleep, convinced it would ward off frost and bad dreams. You imagine yourself doing the same, slowly running through each layer in your mind, a personal litany that blends absurdity with survival instinct. The act itself is calming, like a mantra repeated in rhythm with your breathing. Outside, the wind flaps the tent, but inside, a warm hush settles. Snoring, the faint hum of a lamp, and the occasional shuffle of a restless man create a lullaby unique to this frozen frontier. You drift in and out, lulled by the continuity of sound, the soft weight of furs, and the knowledge that the rituals have protected you through the longest night. And now, as the final minutes of wakefulness dissolve, you feel a gentle surrender. Sleep envelops you fully, carrying the warmth, absurdity, and humanity of the Victorian Arctic into dreams. The boots, the biscuit, the cocoa, they are no longer objects, only symbols of resilience and shared experience. In this moment, the Arctic, vast and indifferent, becomes a strangely comforting presence, its cold softened by ritual, camaraderie, and imagination. Slowly your breathing steadies. The night sounds fade into a gentle background hum, and your mind floats toward rest. Tonight, the Arctic has been tamed not by force but by human ingenuity, humor, and the peculiar, endearing rituals that mark bedtime at the ends of the earth. As you sink further into sleep, the world softens. The flaps of canvas, the groaning ice, and the distant whines of dogs become a gentle lullaby, distant and reassuring rather than alarming. Each layer of wool, each fold of fur, presses softly against your body like a weighted embrace, reminding you that warmth exists even in extreme places. You imagine the tent as a small, safe bubble, a universe of calm in the midst of white desolation. The peculiar rituals that once seemed absurd, the biscuit pillows, the boots, the charms and whispered mantras, now take on a tender quality. They are marks of humanity, little threads of comfort woven into the harsh fabric of Arctic life. You picture the explorers, their cheeks pressed against hardtack or coats, sharing this quiet endurance with one another, each small habit a testament to resilience, creativity, and gentle humor. Your mind drifts over cocoa-sweetened moments and grog-warmed throats, the soft snoring of companions, the rhythmic sighs of ice, and the muted flicker of a lamp. These sounds, smells, and textures meld into a calm river that carries you toward deeper sleep. You feel your heartbeat slowing, each breath longer, each sigh softer, as you release the day and surrender fully to rest. And as your eyelids finally close, The Arctic night holds you tenderly, a paradox of severity softened by warmth, ritual, and imagination. There is no rush, no danger in this moment, only peace. Tonight,
Always the world feels just distant enough, and your sleep, strange as it may be in such extreme circumstances, is complete. Drift gently, breathe deeply, and let the calm linger. Sweet dreams.